The dust of the main street swirls as a rancher shoves his daughter into the arms of a man twice her size. The church bell tolls, doors creak open, townsfolk whisper. To her father, she's nothing but shame. To the cowboy, she's a gift he vows to protect. But behind the lamplight kindness is a dangerous secret, a hidden deed, water rights worth a fortune, and a father who'd rather see his daughter destroyed than lose control. Hooves thunder in the night, fists crash, and a courtroom gasps. As the truth rises like fire, she thought she was punishment. He saw her as promise. Will mercy save her, or will pride tear everything apart? Every story I share leads with love, for people, for healing, for the things we sometimes forget to say out loud. Dawn painted the Wyoming sky in gentle strokes of pink and gold as Evangeline Thorne made her way across the ranch yard, a heavy basket of laundry balanced against her hip. The early morning air still held its spring chill, but she knew the sun would soon warm the day. Her muscles ached from yesterday's work, scrubbing floors, mending fences, and helping with the spring calving. The basket grew heavier with each step. Last night's harsh words from her father Silas echoed in her mind, familiar as the creak of the windmill that turned lazily above the ranch house. Too big, too slow, too much of everything, he'd muttered when she'd brought him his evening. Coffee. The words stung, same as they always did. Evangeline paused to adjust her grip on the basket, her worn cotton dress pulling tight across her shoulders. She was built solid, like her mother had been, strong enough to handle ranch work, but not delicate like the ladies in town. The thought brought a familiar ache to her chest. The smell of coffee and frying bacon drifted from the kitchen window as she approached the house. Through the glass, she could see Martha, their cook, busy at the stove. The cattle buyer would be joining them for breakfast. Another chance for her father to parade his shame at having such an unmarriageable daughter. Setting the basket down on the back porch, Evangeline smoothed her hair and straightened her apron before stepping inside. The kitchen was warm and bright, but tension hung heavy in the air. Her father sat at the head of the table, his face set in stern lines as he discussed cattle prices with Mr. Harrison, the buyer from Cheyenne. Morning, Pa, Mr. Harrison, Evangeline said softly. Moving to help Martha serve the meal, Mr. Harrison's eyes swept over her frame, his lip curling slightly. My word, Thorne, he said, with a laugh that held no humor. You weren't exaggerating. About the size of her, built more like a field hand than a proper young lady. Color flooded Evangeline's cheeks as she set down the coffee pot with trembling hands. She didn't dare look at her father, but she could feel the heat of his humiliation radiating across the table. Silas's face had turned a dark red, his knuckles white around his coffee cup. The shame in his eyes when he finally glanced at his daughter cut deeper than any harsh word could have. Breakfast passed in tense silence after that, broken only by the scrape of forks against plates. By mid-morning, Evangeline found herself beside her father in the wagon, heading into town. Silas hadn't spoken a word to her since breakfast, but his bitter anger filled the space between them. The wagon wheels kicked up dust as they rolled down the rutted road, each bump and jolt making her stomach clench with dread. The main street of Silver Creek was busy with the usual morning traffic, women doing their shopping, ranchers loading supplies, children darting between horses and wagons. As Silas drew the wagon to a halt, curious faces turned their way. Outside the blacksmith shop, Boaz Calder's massive frame cast a long shadow as he unloaded fence rails from a cart, despite his intimidating size and the scars that marked one. Side of his face, there was a gentle sureness to his movements that always caught Evangeline's attention. Silas's hand closed hard around her arm as he practically dragged her from the wagon. His voice rang out across the street, sharp and cruel. Folks of Silver Creek, hear me well. I've had enough of this burden of a daughter. Too stubborn to slim down, too proud to know her place. His fingers dug into her flesh as he pulled her. Forward, I'm giving her away. Let her be someone else's shame to bear. The crowd that had gathered fell silent, shock written across their faces. Evangeline's vision blurred with tears as her father shoved her roughly toward Boaz Calder. She stumbled, certain she would fall. but strong hands caught her shoulders, steadying her with surprising gentleness. "Easy now," Boaz's deep voice rumbled, quiet enough that only she could hear. Then louder, addressing Silas in the watching crowd, he spoke with calm authority. "There'll be no more shaming today." Evangeline finally dared to look up at him. Despite the scars that twisted one side of his face, his eyes held nothing but kindness as they met hers. His massive hands still rested lightly on her shoulders, offering support without restraint. "Should not be a burden in my house?" Boaz continued, his voice carrying clearly across the now silent street. "She be safe." The simple declaration held no room for argument, no trace of the mockery or pity Evangeline had grown to expect. The watching crowd seemed to hold its breath, uncertain how to react to this unexpected turn of events. Some women whispered behind their hands, while others looked on with something like approval in their eyes. The children who usually ran from Boaz's scarred appearance stood still, watching with wide eyes as he continued to steady Evangeline with careful hands. "You can't be serious, Calder," Silas spat, his face mottled with rage. "Taking in my worthless girl. Out of what? Pity? Charity?" "Neither," Boaz replied evenly. "I'm offering her a home where she'll be valued, nothing more or less." His calm words seemed to take the wind from Silas's sails, leaving the older man sputtering. Evangeline barely dared to breathe, afraid to break whatever spell had fallen over the street. The morning sun warm on her face, the solid presence of Boaz beside her, the absolute certainty in his voice when he spoke of her worth. It all felt like a dream. She might wake from at any moment. Mrs. Peterson from the general store stepped forward, her kind face set with determination. "Come along, dear," she said to Evangeline. "Let's get you settled while Mr. Calder and your father sort out the details." She shot Silas a look that could have curdled milk before taking Evangeline's arm. "Much obliged, Mrs. Peterson," Boaz said with a slight nod. "I'll need a few minutes to finish unloading these rails, then we can see to making proper arrangements." His eyes met Evangeline's again, steady and reassuring. "If that suits you, Miss Thorne." The simple courtesy of being asked her preference nearly brought fresh tears to her eyes. She managed a small nod, her voice barely a whisper. "Yes, thank you." As Mrs. Peterson led her toward the store's shaded porch, Evangeline could hear Boaz's measured voice addressing her father, could feel the weight of the town's eyes following her progress. But for the first time in years, the attention didn't make her want to shrink into herself. Something in the way Boaz had spoken of her, had looked at her with such simple respect, made her stand a little straighter despite her trembling knees. The morning that had started with such familiar shame had somehow transformed into something entirely unexpected. As she sank onto Mrs. Peterson's offered chair, Evangeline found herself remembering her mother's favorite saying, "The Lord works in mysterious ways, child, and often through the most unexpected vessels." Looking back toward the street where Boaz stood tall against her father's anger, she offered up a silent prayer of thanks. Whatever came next, she knew with sudden certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. Through the store window, she could see her father's wagon pulling away in a cloud of dust, leaving her behind for good. The sight brought both grief and relief flooding through her chest. But as Mrs. Peterson pressed a cup of tea into her hands and began discussing practical matters of household arrangements, Evangeline felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Hope, doubt it, bloomed fragile but persistent in her heart, like the first wildflowers pushing through spring snow. Boaz's words echoed in her mind. She'd be safe. 3 simple words that promised everything she'd never dared to dream of: respect, protection, and perhaps even the chance to discover who she truly was beyond her father's shame. The morning sun continued its climb into the Wyoming sky, casting long shadows across Silver Creek's main street. But for Evangeline Thorne, it felt less like an ending and more like the first light of a new dawn breaking over unexpected horizon. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across Silver Creek's main street as Boaz helped Evangeline into his wagon. Her father had already turned away, leaving nothing but a cloud of dust and whispers from the townsfolk who'd witnessed the scene. Evangeline kept her eyes fixed on her hands, folded in her lap, her shoulders curved inward, as if to make herself smaller. Boaz climbed up beside her, his massive frame making the wagon seat creak. He handled the reins with surprising gentleness. For hands so large and work-roughened, "It's not far," he said, his voice low and steady. "Just past the creek bend." The wagon wheels turned slowly over the rutted road, each rotation marked by a familiar squeak. Neither spoke as they passed the last buildings of town. Then the smithy where Boaz spent his days breaking horses and helping at the forge. The silence stretched between them, but it wasn't harsh like her father's angry quiet. This was different, patient, almost careful. They followed the creek for a quarter-mile before Boaz guided the horses onto a narrow track that wound through a stand of cottonwoods. His cabin appeared through the trees, sturdy and well-maintained, despite its modest size. A thin curl of smoke rose from the stone chimney, and a small corral stood empty beside a lean-to shelter. Boaz set the brake and stepped down, then turned to offer Evangeline his hand. She hesitated only a moment before, accepting it, noting how he adjusted his grip to steady her without gripping too tight. Her feet found the ground, and she glanced up at the cabin that was now, somehow, her home. "Mind the step," Boaz said as he led the way to the door. "Bottom one's a mite loose. Been meaning to fix it." Inside, the cabin was dim but clean, with afternoon light filtering through two small windows. An iron bedstead stood against one wall, neatly made with a faded quilt. A stone hearth dominated the opposite wall, its mantel holding a few books and a carved wooden horse. Shelves lined the walls, some holding more books, others displaying tools and practical items. A coffee pot, tin plates, a wooden box that might hold sewing supplies. "Water's fresh from the creek this morning," Boaz said, gesturing to a ceramic pitcher on the table. "Cups there if you're thirsty." He moved to the hearth where a pot hung over banked coals. "Stew's still warm. You must be hungry after." He trailed off, not mentioning the morning's events. "Thank you," Evangeline managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'll split some kindling," Boaz said. "Give you a moment to." He gestured vaguely at the cabin before stepping outside. Closing the door softly behind him, Evangeline stood rooted in place, listening to his boots crunch on gravel, then the steady thunk of the axe against wood. Her hands trembled as she poured water into a tin cup, half expecting to hear sharp words about her clumsiness when a few drops spilled. But there was only the rhythmic chopping outside, and the soft tick of cooling embers in the hearth that she sank onto. One of the straight-backed chairs at the table, trying to steady her breathing. The cup felt cool against her palms as she sipped, tasting spring water so different from the well water at her father's ranch no longer her home. The thought brought fresh tears, but she blinked them back. The door opened, slowly, giving her time to compose herself as Boaz ducked his scarred head to enter. He carried an armload of split wood, which he stacked carefully by the hearth. Without comment, he ladled stew into 2 bowls and set one before her, along with a spoon and a thick slice of bread. "Eat," he said simply, taking the other chair. "Been cooking since I was a boy. Ain't fancy, but it'll fill you up." Evangeline lifted her spoon with care, remembering too many meals spent trying not to draw attention to herself. The stew was rich with vegetables and tender beef, seasoned with herbs she couldn't name, but that spoke of attention and skill. She took another spoonful, then another, surprise warming her chest at the simple pleasure of food made with care. Boaz ate steadily, his movements deliberate despite his size. He didn't watch her or make cutting remarks about her appetite. When she finished her bread, he wordlessly offered her another piece, accepting her small nod without comment. As darkness crept in through the windows, Boaz lit a lamp and banked the fire for the night. Evangeline sat very still, dreading what might come next, but Boaz simply gathered extra blankets from a chest. "Bed's yours," he said, arranging the blankets on the wooden chair near the hearth. "I sleep light, so if you need anything, just speak up." He settled his large frame into the chair, which creaked but held steady. "Sleep well, Miss Thorne." "Evangeline," she whispered, surprising herself. Just Evangeline. He nodded once. "Sleep well, Evangeline." She slipped beneath the quilt, fully dressed, too uncertain yet to do otherwise. The bed smelled of fresh air and soap, nothing like she'd feared. As her eyes adjusted to the darkness, she could make out Boaz's silhouette. In the chair, his breathing deep and even. The fire popped softly, and somewhere an owl called, but these night sounds felt different here, peaceful rather than threatening. When dawn began to paint the window glass with pale light, Evangeline woke to the soft clink of iron against iron. Boaz stood at the hearth, his broad back turned as he worked at something on the cooking surface. The smell of coffee filled the cabin, rich and promising. "Morning," he said without turning. "Flapjacks will be ready soon. Coffee's hot if you want some." Evangeline sat up slowly, smoothing her wrinkled dress. The morning routine unfolded with surprising normalcy. Coffee poured, plates set out, food served without ceremony, but with quiet care. The flapjacks were golden brown, crisp at the edges and soft in the middle. Boaz offered butter and the last of his summer honey, without comment about how much she might use Dot as she ate. Evangeline felt something inside her chest begin to loosen. Here was no mockery, no sharp words about her size or her appetite or her very existence. This giant of a man, who most folks crossed the street to avoid, treated her with a matter-of-fact respect she'd almost forgotten could exist. The morning sun streamed through the windows, catching dust motes in its beams. Outside, a meadowlark trilled its morning song. And in this simple cabin, over a breakfast of flapjacks and coffee, Evangeline felt the first fragile stirrings of what might be safety. Dawn painted the eastern sky in gentle strokes of pink and gold as Evangeline stirred from her uneasy sleep in Boaz's bed. The cabin's wooden walls held unfamiliar shadows, but the smell of coffee and flapjacks brought comfort to her anxious heart. Boaz had already been up for hours, she guessed. He moved quietly around the cabin's main room. A soft knock at the door made her jump. Through the window, she glimpsed a woman in a neat blue dress carrying a covered basket. Clara Winthrop, the schoolteacher, stood on the threshold, her kind face showing surprise when Boaz opened the door. "Good morning, Mr. Calder," Clara said, her voice carrying clearly through the cabin. "I brought some fresh eggs from my hens, and She paused, spotting Evangeline through the doorway. "Miss Thorne?" "I hadn't expected. Are you well?" Evangeline stepped forward, smoothing her wrinkled skirt. "Miss Winthrop, I'll tend to the horses," Boaz said quietly, ducking his tall frame through the door. His boots crunched on gravel. As he headed for the corral, giving the women privacy, Clara set her basket on the table and took Evangeline's trembling hands in hers. "What happened?" "The whole town's talking, but I wanted to hear the truth from you." Evangeline's voice quavered as she recounted yesterday's events, her father's shame, his cruel announcement, and Boaz's unexpected kindness. Tears slipped down her cheeks as she spoke of the morning's humiliation. "Oh, my dear friend." Clara pulled her into a warm embrace. "Your father had no right. No right at all." They sat at the rough-hewn table, steam rising from the coffee cups. Evangeline poured with shaking hands. Clara's presence brought a touch of normalcy to this strange new reality. "I don't know what to do," Evangeline whispered. "Father's cast me off like damaged goods." "Listen to me," Clara said firmly, her teacher's voice gentle but brooking no argument. "God makes no mistakes in size or shape. You are fearfully and wonderfully made just as you are." She squeezed Evangeline's hand. "And Mr. Calder, well, I've known him to be a man of honor, despite what some folks say about his appearance." Through the window, they could see Boaz working. In the corral, his massive frame moving with careful precision as he checked the fence rails. "He's been nothing but kind," Evangeline admitted. "When everyone else was staring and whispering, he made me feel safe," Clara smiled. "Then, perhaps your father's cruelty has led you to an unexpected blessing. Later that morning, after Clara left with promises to return soon, Evangeline heard raised voices from town carrying on the wind. Through the trees, she glimpsed her father's familiar figure outside the saloon, gesturing angrily to a group of men. She's ruined now. Silas Thorne's words drifted clear and harsh. Let that scarred giant have her. She's no daughter of mine anymore. Evangeline's hands clenched in her apron, but before grief could overwhelm her, Boaz's quiet voice came from behind. Will you help me with the corral? He asked, as if he hadn't heard Silas's words. Got a new mule needs tending. Grateful for the distraction, Evangeline followed him to the small enclosure. A brown mule stood in the corner, ears pricked forward with interest. Here, Boaz said, handing her a length of rope. She needs brushing, but we'll need to catch her first. Evangeline fumbled with the rope, her large hands suddenly feeling clumsy. The mule danced away from her first attempt, making her cheeks burn with embarrassment. Takes practice, Boaz said simply, demonstrating the proper technique. Try again. On her third try, Evangeline managed to get the rope around the mule's neck. The animal immediately stepped closer, stretching its long face toward her. Warm velvet lips tickled her cheek, searching for treats, and a surprised laugh bubbled up from her chest. Well now, Boaz said, the corners of his eyes crinkling. Looks like you've made a friend. They spent the afternoon tending to the animals. Boaz teaching her the proper way to check hooves and brush down coats. Her muscles ached from the unfamiliar work, but it was a clean ache, honest and earned. For the first time in years, she felt truly useful as sunset painted the sky in deep oranges and purples. They sat down to a simple supper of beans and cornbread. The cabin felt different in the evening light, more like a home than a stranger's dwelling. Evangeline found herself studying Boaz's face across the table, the rough scar that ran from his left temple to jaw. The way his huge hands handled the tin plates with such care. I know what it's like, he said suddenly, his deep voice soft in the lamplight. To feel like your size makes you something less than human in others' eyes. Evangeline's breath caught in her throat. How do you bear it? Boaz was quiet for a long moment, stirring his beans thoughtfully. Had a friend help me see truth. Chaska, a Lakota man who works the forge in town. I was young when the accident happened. He touched his scar briefly. Horse spooked, dragged me through a fence. After that, it seemed like folks could only see the marks it left, not the man beneath. He poured them both fresh coffee before continuing. I was angry for a long time. Thought God had made me monstrous. But Chaska, he taught me about dignity. Said every person carries the Creator's breath, no matter their shape. A small smile touched his lips. Took me years to believe him. Evangeline found herself leaning forward, drawn by the quiet strength in his words. And now I know there's no shame in being as God made me. Strong enough to help others, gentle enough to break horses without breaking their spirit. He met her eyes across the table. Just like there's no shame in being as God made you. Understanding passed between them, deep and wordless. Here was a man who knew what it meant to be judged for his body, to be feared and mocked. Yet he had found peace with himself, had built a life of quiet purpose. Thank you, Evangeline whispered, and they both knew she meant more than just the meal or shelter. Boaz nodded, his expression gentle. You're welcome here, Miss Thorne. For as long as you need. The evening settled around them like a comfortable blanket. Outside, a whippoorwill called softly, and the creek murmured its endless song. Evangeline felt something shift in her heart, a small sprout of hope pushing through soil long packed hard by criticism and shame. Here, in this simple cabin with this gentle giant of a man, perhaps she could learn what Boaz already knew, that worth came not from others' judgment, but from the quiet certainty that God made no mistakes in. His creation. The lamplight cast soft shadows on the cabin walls as they cleared the supper dishes together, moving in a careful dance of courtesy. And growing comfort, Evangeline realized she no longer saw Boaz's size as intimidating. Instead, she saw the deliberate grace of his movements, the kindness in his scarred face. The way he made space for her in his home and his life without demand or condition. He wasn't just a protector, though he was certainly that. He was a man who understood pain and had learned to carry it with dignity. A man who could teach her to do the same, if she was brave enough to learn Dot as night deepened outside the cabin windows. Evangeline felt the first real peace she'd known in years settle over her spirit. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. But for now, she was safe. For now, she was beginning to believe that perhaps her father had been wrong about her all along. The morning sun cast long shadows across Boaz's cabin floor as Clara Winthrop approached, clutching a weathered envelope. To her chest, her quick steps and furtive glances suggested more than a social call. Evangeline met her at the door, noting her friend's unusually serious expression. "I found something while organizing the old schoolhouse records," Clara whispered. "Go." They were alone. She pulled Evangeline aside, closing the door softly behind them. Something that changes everything. They settled at the rough wooden table where Clara laid out the envelope with trembling hands. The paper was yellow with age, its corners soft and worn. "I was sorting through documents from when the school first opened, and this fell from between some old attendance lists." Evangeline carefully opened the envelope, unfolding a single sheet of paper. The ink had faded to brown, but the elaborate script remained clear enough to read. Her breath caught as she recognized her mother's elegant signature at the bottom. "It's a deed," Clara explained, her voice low and urgent. "To the Thorn Ranch. Your mother's name is listed as half-owner alongside your father's. The property was meant to be shared between them equally." Evangeline's hands shook as she studied the document. There it was in black and white. Her mother, Sarah Thorne, had legal claim to half the ranch, which meant, by inheritance law, her share would pass to you, Clara confirmed, reaching across to squeeze Evangeline's hand. "You're not just Silas Thorne's unwanted daughter, you're rightful heir to half that land." The revelation hit Evangeline like a physical blow. All these years of her father's cruel words, his tight-fisted control over every aspect of ranch life, his threats to leave her with nothing, and her mother had owned half all along. The injustice of it burned in her throat. "Does my father know about this?" she managed to ask. Clara shook her head. "I don't believe so. This copy was filed with the school's founding documents because your mother was on the first school board. The original would be at the county seat." The door opened, and both women startled as Boaz ducked his tall frame through the entrance. He took in their serious faces and the document between them. "Miss Winthrop," he greeted Clara politely, then turned to Evangeline. "Everything all right?" Evangeline wordlessly held out the deed. Boaz studied it carefully, his expression growing. Grave as he read, "This changes things," he said finally, setting the paper down with deliberate care. "But we need to move cautiously. Your father won't take kindly to this news." "He has no choice," Clara insisted. "It's legal documentation." "Legal don't always mean much out here," Boaz replied quietly. "Especially with a man like Silas Thorne. He's got connections, influence. We need to be smart about this." Evangeline knew he was right. Her father wouldn't simply hand over half the ranch because of an old piece of paper. He'd fight and fight dirty Dot as evening approached. The rhythmic ring of a hammer on anvil announced Chaska's arrival. The Lakota blacksmith had come to shoe Boaz's horse, but his dark eyes held concern as he worked. "Railroad men were at the saloon again," he reported, fitting a hot shoe to the horse's hoof. "Talking with your father." Evangeline's heart sank. She'd heard whispers about the railroad's interest in the ranch's water rights. The creek that ran through Thorne land was one of the most reliable water sources in the county. When the shoeing was done, they gathered around Boaz's kitchen table, steam rising from cups of strong coffee. Chaska's weathered face was serious. "In the lamplight, they're offering good money," he continued. "More than good. But they want control of all water rights, not just access. Would change everything downstream." Evangeline thought of the smaller ranches that depended on that water, the Lakota families who had traditional rights to the creek. Her father never cared much for others' needs, but she'd grown up watching her mother share water with struggling neighbors during dry years. "That's why he was so eager to be rid of me," she said softly. He's planning to sell, and he didn't want any legitimate heir complicating things. Boaz nodded slowly. Makes sense. Railroad money's hard to resist, and Silas always did put profit over people. But the deed changes everything, Clara pointed out. He can't sell without Evangeline's consent, not if she owns half. Which is why we need to be careful, Boaz cautioned. Man like Silas, cornered by greed and pride, that's dangerous. Chaska made a sound of agreement. Need to secure proof first. Get copy from county seat before making any moves. They talked. Late into the evening, planning careful steps forward. When Clara and Chaska finally left, Evangeline felt the weight of the day's revelation settling. Heavy on her shoulders, the cabin was quiet save for the soft crackle of the hearth fire. Boaz had stepped outside to check on his horse, leaving Evangeline alone with her thoughts. She knelt beside the warm stones of the fireplace, clasping her hands in prayer as her mother had taught her. Lord, she whispered, I don't know what to do with this knowledge. I don't seek revenge, but I can't let Father sell away other folks' water rights. Give me wisdom to move forward with grace, not bitterness. The flames danced before her, casting shifting shadows on the walls. Her mother had always said that prayer wasn't about asking God to solve problems, but about finding strength to face them. Now, kneeling on the rough floorboards, Evangeline felt that strength beginning to flow into her spirit. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about doing right by her mother's memory, about protecting those who depended on the creeks. Life-giving water. She would need every ounce of courage and wisdom to stand against her father's schemes. The deed lay on the table behind her, its faded ink holding the power to change everything. But Evangeline knew Boaz was right. They would have to move carefully. Her father was a dangerous man when crossed. And now she understood just how much she stood to lose. Rising from her prayers, Evangeline touched the deed one last time before carefully folding it away. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but for now, she had something she'd never possessed before. Legal right to stand her ground. Her mother had left her more than just memories. She'd left her the means to finally face down Silas. Thorn's tyranny. The first rays of sunlight had barely touched the frost-covered grass when hoofbeats approached Boaz's cabin. Evangeline stood at the window, her hands trembling as she recognized her father's bay stallion, leading two more riders toward the house. Boaz rose from where he'd been stoking the morning fire, his massive frame casting a long shadow across the wooden floor. Stay inside, he said quietly, but Evangeline shook her head. I won't hide, she whispered, though her voice quavered. Not anymore. They stepped onto the porch together, just as Silas Thorne reined his horse to a stop. His face was thunderous, and the two ranch hands flanking him, Tom Wheeler and Pete Davis, kept their eyes fixed firmly on their saddle horns. Come home, girl, Silas barked, not bothering with greeting. You've made your point with this foolishness. Evangeline felt her legs weaken, but Boaz's solid presence beside her gave her strength. I'm not coming back, Father. Silas's face darkened further. This ain't a request. You're my daughter, and you'll do as you're told. She's a grown woman, Boaz said, his deep voice calm but firm. She makes her own choices now. Choices? Silas spat on the ground. What choices does a burden like her have? I heard about that. Deed you think you found? Don't matter none. Railroad's backing me, and they've got lawyers that'll bury any claim she tries to make. The cruel words hit Evangeline like physical blows. She swayed slightly, and Boaz's hand came up to steady her. Elbow. You want to press this? Silas continued, his voice rising. Go ahead. I'll cut you out of everything. Won't be a penny or acre left when I'm done. That deed ain't worth the paper it's written on. Not when you're nothing but a fat cast-off. No. Men would want accept this. He gestured dismissively at Boaz. This scarred giant who probably just wants free labor. Evangeline's vision swam, darkness creeping at the edges. The hatred in her father's voice was almost too much to bear. But Boaz's grip remained firm, anchoring her to the moment. You're done here, Thorne, Boaz said quietly. Take your men and go. Silas's hand twitched toward his gun belt, but even he wasn't fool enough to draw against Boaz Calder. The giant cowboy's reputation with a pistol was well known, though he rarely spoke of it. "This ain't over," Silas snarled, wheeling his horse around. "Remember what I said, girl. You press this, and you'll get nothing." Nothing. The three riders thundered away, leaving clouds of dust in their wake. As soon as they were out of sight, Evangeline's legs gave way. Boaz caught her before she could fall, helping her to the porch bench. "I'm sorry," she sobbed, shame washing over her in waves. "I'm so sorry." "He's right. I am nothing but trouble. You should send me away before." "Stop," Boaz said firmly, kneeling despite his size to meet her eyes. "Your father's anger proves you matter more than he admits. A man doesn't rage like that over something worthless. He's scared, Evangeline. Scared of losing control. Scared of you standing up to him." She wiped her eyes with trembling hands. "But the railroad, they're lawyers. We'll face that too," he assured her. "You're not alone in this fight." By midday, Clara and Chaska had arrived, summoned by a note Boaz sent into town. They gathered around the cabin's table, where Clara spread out paper and ink. "We need to document everything," the school teacher said, her usual gentle manner replaced by fierce determination. "Every threat, every witness to his treatment of you, every detail about your mother's involvement with the ranch." Chaska nodded gravely. "I remember when your mother helped my people during drought years. She understood the water belonged to all. These memories, they matter in court." "Court," Evangeline whispered, still shaken from the morning's confrontation. "If needed," Clara confirmed. "Though we'll try other paths first, but we must be prepared. Your father's threats this morning show he won't yield easily." They spent hours building their case, Clara's neat handwriting filling page after page. Chaska contributed knowledge of water rights and local history, while Boaz recalled conversations he'd overheard about the railroad's plans. "The water rights are key," Chaska explained, pointing to a rough map he'd drawn. "Railroad once controlled to supply steam engines, new towns they plan, but creek feeds many ranches, many families. Your mother understood this balance." Evangeline thought of the smaller spreads downstream, of the Lakota camps that had used the water for generations. Her father would sacrifice them all for railroad money, but her mother's deed gave her power to prevent that. "I'm scared," she admitted softly, "but I have to try. For Mother's sake, and for everyone who depends on that water." Clara reached across the table to squeeze her hand. "You're doing the right thing, Evangeline. God doesn't give us challenges we can't handle, especially when we stand together." "Together," Boaz echoed, his deep voice reassuring. "Whatever comes, you're not facing it alone." Looking around the table at these three people who believed in her, the gentle giant who'd given her shelter, the fierce schoolteacher who'd found the deed, and the wise blacksmith who understood the true value of water, Evangeline felt strength returning to her spirit. Her father's cruel words still hurt, but they no longer held the power to crush her completely. They worked until sunset, building their case piece by piece. There would be hard days ahead, Evangeline knew. Her father wouldn't give up easily, and the railroad's influence ran deep. But for the first time in her life, she had allies who saw her true worth. Not as a burden to be discarded, but as a woman strong enough to stand for what was right. The autumn days settled into an easy rhythm at Boaz's cabin. Each morning, Evangeline woke to the sound of him stoking the fire, the familiar crackle and pop of kindling a comfort she'd never known at her father's ranch. She'd prepare breakfast while he fed the stock, and they'd share quiet meals at his sturdy table, sunlight streaming through the window's dot this morning. She watched from the doorway as Boaz worked with his horses in the corral, his massive hands, so powerful they could bend iron, moved with surprising gentleness as he adjusted the bridle on his bay mare, Sweet Jane. "Would you like to learn?" he called, noticing her interest. Evangeline hesitated. "I might just spoil the leather." "Nonsense." He gestured her over. These hands were clumsy once, too. She approached the fence, and he showed her how to oil and stitch the worn leather straps. His fingers guided hers carefully, teaching her the proper tension for each repair. The leather was smooth beneath her fingertips, and she found herself relaxing into the task. You have a natural touch, he observed quietly. A blush warmed her cheeks. Pa always said I was too rough with delicate things. Your father? Boaz said carefully, was wrong about many things. Later that afternoon, he led Sweet Jane from the corral. Time you learn to ride proper, he announced. Evangeline backed away. Oh, no, I couldn't. I'm too heavy, I'd hurt her. Boaz's expression softened. Sweet Jane's carried heavier loads than you up mountain trails. She's strong and steady, like her rider should be. His quiet confidence gave her courage. With his help, she mounted the mare, surprised at how secure she felt in the saddle. Boaz led them in slow circles, teaching her to feel the horse's rhythm. That's it, he encouraged. You're a natural. For the first time in years, Evangeline felt graceful. Sweet Jane responded to her lightest touch, and soon they were walking the fence line together while Boaz watched approvingly Dot as evening approached. They heard the clip-clop of Claire's buggy coming up the road. The schoolteacher's face was bright as she climbed down, clutching a stack of papers. I brought the new hymn sheets for Sunday service, she announced, following them inside. Reverend Matthews chose such lovely songs this week. They gathered around the table as Clara spread out the sheets. Evangeline began preparing supper, humming one of the familiar tunes as she worked. The melody of Amazing Grace filled the cabin's warm air. Boaz looked up from where he was setting plates. You have a beautiful voice, he said softly. Hands stilled on the pot handle. Oh no, it's nothing special. You should sing in church, he suggested. The choir needs more voices. She shook her head quickly. I couldn't. Everyone would stare. They'd stare because your voice touches the heart, Clara interjected. Like it's doing right now. But Evangeline's throat had closed up. The thought of standing before the congregation, being judged. Please, she whispered. I'm not ready for that. They didn't press her further, and soon Claire departed with promises to visit again soon. After supper, Evangeline and Boaz settled in their usual places by the fire. She in the rocking chair, he in his sturdy armchair. The flames cast dancing shadows on the walls as Boaz slowly rolled up his sleeve, revealing the thick scars that twisted up his forearm. I was 19, he said quietly, when it happened. Working as a horsebreaker on the Circle M ranch. There was this stallion, beautiful paint horse, proud as the devil himself. I thought I could tame him faster than anyone else. Evangeline leaned forward, drawn by the pain in his voice. He threw me, then came down on top of me, crushed my ribs, broke my arm in 3 places. Doc said it was a miracle I lived. His fingers traced the scars. When I healed, I was changed, bigger, somehow, like my body built itself back stronger than before. But people started looking at me different. Mothers would pull their children aside when I walked past. Men would cross the street. Because they didn't know your heart, Evangeline whispered. He nodded slowly. They saw the size, the scars, and decided I was dangerous. A brute. Started calling me giant instead of my name. Even my own family grew distant. Without thinking, Evangeline reached across and touched his hand. His fingers were rough with calluses but warm against hers. You are more gentle than any man I know, she said softly. Their eyes met in the firelight, and something shifted in the air between them. His hand turned beneath hers, fingers curling carefully around her palm. When your father brought you here, he said, I recognized the look in your eyes. The same one I used to see in my mirror. Someone who'd been told they were too much, too big, too different. Tears pricked at Evangeline's eyes. How did you stop believing it? Chaska helped. He said size was a gift from the Creator, meant for protecting others, and slowly, I learned he was right. His thumb traced small circles on her hand. Your size holds strength, too, Evangeline. Strength to nurture, to stand firm, to carry others' burdens. She thought of the morning's riding lesson, how Sweet Jane had responded to her touch. Of the leather she'd mended, the meals she'd cooked, the home she was helping create in this cabin. I'm starting to believe that, she admitted. They sat in. Comfortable silence, hands still joined while the fire burned low. The night's peace wrapped around them like a blanket, and Evangeline felt another small piece of her heart's armor soften and fall away. Sunday morning dawned clear and crisp, with autumn sunlight painting the hills in shades of gold and amber. Evangeline stood before the small mirror in Boaz's cabin, smoothing her best dress, a simple navy cotton she'd brought from home. Her fingers trembled slightly as she pinned up her hair. "The buggy's ready," Boaz called from outside. She took a deep breath, gathering her courage. This would be their first time attending church together, and her stomach churned at the thought of facing the entire town. Through the window, she watched Boaz checking the harness on his wagon team. He'd put on his good black coat, and even from here she could see he'd carefully oiled his boots. The ride into town was quiet, broken only by the steady clip-clop of hooves and the creak of wagon wheels. Evangeline clutched her covered dish, a cherry pie she'd baked for the potluck, and tried to still her racing heart. As they approached the white-painted church, she saw dozens of buggies and wagons already parked in neat rows. "Remember?" Boaz said softly as he helped her down. "You have nothing to prove to anyone." But the whispers started as soon as they climbed the church steps. Ladies huddled in clusters, fans fluttering as they stared. Men paused their conversations to watch. The unlikely pair, the giant scarred cowboy and the large woman who'd been cast out by her father. "What an odd match," someone murmured. "Did you hear how it happened?" another voice carried. Her own father, Clara, appeared suddenly, cutting through the gossip with her bright presence. "Evangeline, I saved seats for you both right up front." Evangeline hesitated, but Boaz's steady hand at her elbow gave her strength. They followed Clara past the rows of hard wooden pews, feeling eyes track their every move. She placed her pie among the other dishes laid out for the potluck, then sank gratefully onto the bench beside Clara. Pastor Holt stood to begin the service, his weathered face kind as he surveyed his congregation. "Today," he announced, "we'll be examining the nature of mercy." The sermon that followed seemed aimed straight at Evangeline's heart. The pastor spoke of how true mercy wasn't just forgiveness, but seeing the divine worth in every soul. He described how Christ himself sought out those whom society rejected. "Mercy," Pastor Holt said, his voice carrying to the rafters, "means looking past outer appearances to recognize the image of God in each person we meet. It means extending grace even to those who've wounded us." Evangeline felt tears prick her eyes as the pastor's words washed over her. Beside her, Boaz sat very still, his large hands clasped in his lap. After the final prayer, as people began shifting in their seats, Boaz turned to her. "Would you sing for us?" he asked quietly. Her heart leaped into her throat. "Now?" He nodded. "I heard you practicing Come Thou Fount yesterday." The whole congregation should hear that voice. "Oh, I couldn't possibly," but Clara was already nudging her encouragingly. "Please?" Boaz's eyes were gentle. "Just one song." Before she could protest further, Clara had whispered something to Pastor Holt, who smiled and gestured for Evangeline to come forward. Her legs felt like lead as she rose. But Boaz's quiet, "You can do this," gave her strength. The wooden floor creaked beneath her feet as she made her way to the front. She could feel every eye in the church fixed upon her, could sense the mix of curiosity and judgment. Near the back, she glimpsed her father's face, dark with disapproval, taking a shaky breath. Evangeline closed her eyes and began to sing. "Come thou, fount of every blessing, tune my heart to sing thy grace." Her voice, tremulous at first, grew stronger with each note. The familiar words poured from her heart, filling the sanctuary with rich, clear tones that seemed to come from someplace deeper than herself. She sang of God's mercy, of streams of grace, of hearts tuned to divine love. The usual rustling and whispers of the congregation fell silent. Even the autumn breeze seemed to still outside the windows. When she opened her eyes, she saw faces transformed with wonder. Mrs. Peterson, who had always criticized her size, sat with tears streaming down her cheeks. The cattle buyer who'd mocked her at breakfast that fateful day stared open-mouthed. "Here, I raise my Ebenezer, hither by thy help I'm come." She found Boaz's face in the crowd, his eyes shining with such pride and tenderness that her voice nearly faltered. But the sight of his quiet joy gave her courage to sing even more boldly. Clara sat beside him, hands clasped in delight, beaming like a proud sister dot. As the final notes faded into the hushed sanctuary, there was a moment of absolute stillness. Then Clara started clapping, and suddenly the whole church erupted in applause. People who'd never given her a kind word were smiling, nodding, wiping away tears. For one radiant moment, Evangeline felt truly beautiful. Not despite her size, but somehow complete in herself, exactly as God had made her. She caught a glimpse of her father standing rigid by the door, his face twisted with humiliation. But even his glare couldn't diminish the joy singing in her heart. She made her way back to her seat, cheeks flushed. Boaz squeezed her hand as she sat down, and she saw in his eyes the same truth she was just beginning to grasp. That beauty came in all sizes, and that love saw past the surface to the soul beneath. That was a gift, Castor Holt said warmly. From the pulpit, a reminder that the Lord's blessings flow through unexpected vessels. As the congregation moved toward the potluck tables, people stopped to compliment her singing. Even those who'd whispered about her earlier now smiled and welcomed her. She heard someone say, "Who knew she had such a voice?" And another reply, "Like an angel, I declare." Through it all, Boaz stayed close, his solid presence a shield and anchor. When Mrs. Peterson asked if she'd consider joining the choir, he beamed with quiet pride. When the cattle buyer awkwardly apologized for his previous rudeness, Boaz's hand on her shoulder gave her strength to accept graciously. Only Silas remained apart, standing rigid by the church door, his face dark with fury at seeing his cast-off daughter become the center of admiration. But for once, his anger couldn't touch her. She was spurred by Boaz's strength, Clara's friendship, and her own newfound courage, and she knew that nothing could take away the moment when her voice had filled the sanctuary with praise. Autumn evening settled softly around Boaz's cabin as he and Evangeline returned from church. Golden light slanted through the cottonwoods, casting long shadows across the yard. They'd walked home slowly, savoring the peace that lingered after her song in church. Now, Boaz paused at his front door, his broad shoulders tensing slightly. "Something ain't right," he murmured, placing a protective hand on Evangeline's arm. The cabin looked untouched, but years on the frontier had taught him to trust his instincts. The air felt wrong somehow, charged with hidden menace before he could warn Evangeline to stay back. The door burst open. 4 dark figures rushed out, Silas Thorne and 3 men Boaz didn't recognize, their faces shadowed by low-pulled hats. They moved with the fluid grace of practiced killers. "Evening. Giant," Silas sneered, leveling a wooden club. "Time to teach you about touching what ain't yours." The first blow caught Boaz's right shoulder before he could fully turn. Pain exploded through his arm, but he managed to shove Evangeline behind him. "Run," he ordered, his voice rough with urgency. But the hired men had already circled around. 2 grabbed Evangeline, while the 3rd joined Silas in attacking Boaz. The club rose and fell with sickening thuds. Though Boaz tried to fight back, his injured shoulder made his movements clumsy. Another strike caught him in the ribs, driving the air from his lungs. "Stop it, please," Evangeline screamed, struggling against the men who held her. "Father, don't do this." Silas ignored her pleas, bringing the club down again. Boaz stumbled, his vision blurring. He reached desperately toward Evangeline, but his legs wouldn't hold him. The last thing he saw before darkness took him was her tear-streaked face as they dragged her away. "Get her in the wagon," Silas commanded, his voice cold with triumph. "I've made arrangements with a sanitarium back east. They specialize in women who can't govern their appetites." He grabbed Evangeline's chin roughly. "You'll learn discipline there, girl. Maybe come back knowing your proper place." "No," Evangeline sobbed as they forced her toward the waiting wagon. The lantern light caught the tears streaming down her face. "Please, Father, don't do this." But Silas's expression showed no mercy as he climbed onto the wagon seat. The hired men threw Evangeline into the back like a sack of grain, ignoring her cries. With a sharp snap of the reins, Silas turned the team toward town. The wagon's wheels crunched over gravel. Ben faded into the gathering dark, leaving only silence behind. Boaz lay motionless on the cabin floor, blood seeping from cuts where the club had broken skin. The autumn night deepened around him, stars appearing one by one in the sky beyond his open door. Hours passed in darkness. Dawn was just breaking when Chaska found him. The Lakota blacksmith knelt beside his friend, checking for signs of life with gentle hands. Finding a pulse, he carefully lifted Boaz's battered form. Though Chaska was strong from his work at the forge, carrying such a large man was no easy task. Still, he managed to get Boaz onto his horse, supporting him for the slow ride to safety. As they moved through the pearl-gray morning, Boaz stirred briefly, his swollen lips forming one word, Evangeline. But she was already gone, the wagon, carrying her further east with each passing minute, toward a fate that filled her heart with dread. And Boaz, who had sworn to protect her, could only drift in darkness, his body broken by his failure to keep that promise. The rising sun painted the hills in shades of rose and gold, but its beauty fell on empty lands. Where there had been hope and healing just hours before, now there was only absence and pain, and the echoing sound of wagon wheels carrying Evangeline away from everything she had come to love. Evangeline pressed her forehead against the cool glass of the bedroom window, her breath fogging the pain. Iron bars, freshly mounted, cast thin shadows across her face in the fading light. The familiar view of the ranch yard, the corral where she'd fed chickens since childhood, the old oak where she'd hung laundry, now seemed like a distant. Painting she could no longer touch. Heavy boots creaked on the porch below. Her father's voice drifted up, sharp with authority as he dictated to someone. And once my daughter is properly situated in the sanitarium, I'll be free to negotiate the water rights. The railroad can count on my full cooperation. Evangeline's stomach churned. She pressed a hand against the rough wood of the window frame, steadying herself. The word sanitarium echoed in her mind like a death knell. She'd heard whispers about such places, where difficult women were sent to be forgotten. The bedroom that had once been her sanctuary now felt like a cage. Silas had stripped it bare except for the narrow bed and a washstand. Even her mother's old Bible was gone, though Evangeline had managed to hide her mother's deed inside her dress before being locked away. As twilight deepened, Silas's voice continued below. The contracts will be signed within the month. My daughter's appetite for attention won't interfere with progress. Evangeline sank to her knees beside the bed, the familiar quilt offering small comfort. Her mother's voice seemed to whisper from years past, gentle words spoken over the same. Bed during childhood prayers. The Lord sees you, dear heart. He knows your worth. Mama, Evangeline whispered, her voice breaking. I wish you were here. She clasped her hands together, closing her eyes tight against tears. Lord, please, I know I'm not much to look at. Papa, make sure I never forget that. But Mama always said you don't make mistakes. Help me be strong like she was. Help me find a way. The floorboards creaked softly by the window. Evangeline's head snapped up, her heart racing, but it was only the wind. Still, she crept closer to investigate. The moon had risen, casting silver light across the yard, where her father still paced, gesturing as he spoke with a man in a fine coat. Railroad business, no doubt, a small sound, the scratch of paper against wood, drew her attention. There, being pushed through a gap between the bars and sill, was a folded note. Evangeline's trembling fingers snatched it before it could flutter away. She recognized Clara's neat handwriting immediately. Boaz lives. We will come. The simple words blurred as tears filled Evangeline's eyes. She pressed the paper to her chest, feeling as though she could breathe properly for the first time since being dragged from Boaz's cabin. He was alive. The image of him lying still on his cabin floor had haunted her every moment. Below, a shadow moved near the corner of the house. Clara, slipping away into the darkness. Evangeline whispered a prayer of thanks for such a friend, then carefully tucked the precious note into her dress alongside the deed. Miles away, in Chaska's dwelling at the edge of town, Boaz struggled to sit up despite his friend's protests. "Easy, brother," Chaska murmured, pressing him back onto the pallet. "The herbs need time to work." "I ain't got time," Boaz growled, though he couldn't hide his wince. His shoulder blazed with pain, and his ribs felt like they were wrapped in fire. The pungent smell of healing herbs filled the small space. Chaska's dark eyes were serious as he ground more medicine. "You help no one by trying to ride before you can walk." The spirits of healing work in their own time. Boaz's large hands clenched into fists. "While I lie here useless, that snake Silas." He broke off, his breath catching at a stab of pain. Pain. "She is stronger than Silas knows," Chaska said quietly, applying fresh poultices to Boaz's worst bruises. "And she is not alone. The schoolteacher watches. I have friends who watch. We will not let her be taken." Boaz stared up at the ceiling, his scarred face tight with determination. "I made her a promise," he said through gritted teeth. "Said she'd be safe in my care. I am to keep that promise." "And you will?" Chaska assured him, his skilled hands continuing their work. "But first, you must heal. Rest now, brother. Build your strength. Soon enough you will need it." In her father's house, Evangeline had curled up on the bed, Clara's note clutched in her hand beneath the quilt. The sounds of her father's voice had finally faded as he retired for the night. A coyote called in the distance, reminding her of evenings at Boaz's cabin, when such sounds had been a comfort rather than a reminder of her isolation. She touched the hidden note again, drawing strength from its promise. Boaz lived. He and their friends hadn't abandoned her. For now, that knowledge would have to be enough. Evangeline closed her eyes, her mother's old prayer rising to her lips. "The Lord sees you, dear heart. He knows your worth." In the darkness, she clung to those words like a lifeline, waiting for dawn. 3 days crawled past like molasses in winter. Boaz's ribs ached with each breath, and purple bruises mapped his torso where Silas's men had struck. But dawn found him in the saddle anyway, gritting his teeth against the pain as his horse picked its way toward the county seat. Beside him, Chaska rode in watchful silence, his dark eyes scanning the horizon. The courthouse rose ahead of them, its weathered limestone blocks catching the morning sun. Pastor Holt already waited on the steps, his Bible tucked under one arm and the leather document case in his other hand. His usually neat collar was crooked, betraying sleepless nights spent searching through church records for the deed. "Brother?" "Calder," the pastor called softly as Boaz dismounted with a barely hidden wince. "The Lord provides a way through law as well as strength." Boaz nodded, though his fists clenched at his sides. Every fiber of his being wanted to ride straight to the Thorn Ranch and break down doors until he found Evangeline. But that path led only to more violence, more pain. "The deed's clear as day," Pastor Holt continued, patting the case. "Sarah, Dorn's signature, witness proper, half ownership of all ranch holdings passed to her daughter upon death." They climbed the courthouse steps together, their boots echoing in the empty corridor. The judge's chamber smelled of pipe tobacco. "And old leather." Judge Harrison peered at them over wire-rimmed spectacles, his bushy eyebrows rising at Boaz's battered appearance. "Your Honor," Pastor Holt began, laying out the deed with reverent care. "We come seeking an injunction against Silas Thorne. He's holding his daughter Evangeline against her will, aiming to ship her east to a sanitarium. But she has legal claim to half that ranch through her mother's deed." The judge studied the document, running a finger along its faded text. "Sarah Thorne. Yes, I remember when she passed. God rest her." He looked up sharply. "You say Silas means to send the girl away?" "Yes, sir." Boaz spoke for the first time, his deep voice tight with controlled emotion. "To deny her rightful claim and sell water rights to the railroad." Chaska stepped forward, his presence commanding despite his quiet words. "The ranch's water feeds 3 creeks. Many depend on it, both settlers and my people. This is not just about one woman's freedom." Judge Harrison's pen scratched across official paper. I'll convene a hearing week's end, Friday, 10 o'clock sharp. He pressed his seal into red wax. These letters will summon Silas Thorne to appear and show cause why his daughter's claim shouldn't be upheld. Boaz's heart hammered. 5 more days. 5 days while Evangeline remained locked away, facing her father's wrath alone. That evening, unable to rest, Boaz paced the worn floorboards of Clara's schoolhouse. The teacher had offered it as a meeting place, away from curious eyes in town. Moonlight streamed through the windows, casting his shadow long and dark against the walls. I should ride out tonight, he growled, turning on his heel. Break her out before Silas can spirit her away. The law's too slow. Boaz, please. Clara stood from behind her desk, her face earnest in the lamplight. Violence will only prove Silas right about you. About both of you. She stepped closer, unafraid of his towering form. Evangeline believes in your gentle heart. That's what drew her to trust you, not your strength to break doors, but your strength to be kind. Boaz stopped pacing, his shoulders sagging. The truth of Clara's words pierced deeper than his physical wounds. Evangeline had looked at his scarred face and seen not a monster, but a man capable of tenderness. He couldn't betray that trust now. The law may be slow, Clara continued softly, but it's sure. The deed is clear. Judge Harrison is fair. Trust. In that, and in the God who brought you and Evangeline together in the first place. Boaz nodded heavily, feeling the weight of choice settle in his chest. He would wait. He would trust. He would face Silas Thorne, not with fists or firearms, but with the simple power of truth and justice. Pastor Holt, who had been silently watching, from a corner, stepped forward to lay a weathered hand on Boaz's arm. Let us pray, he said simply. For wisdom, for patience, and for Evangeline's protection until Friday comes. They bowed their heads in the quiet schoolhouse, while outside, stars wheeled overhead and a cool breeze carried the promise of dawn. Friday dawned clear and cold, frost silvering the grass along Main Street. Townsfolk gathered early outside the courthouse, their breath-making clouds in the morning air. Some pretended to have business nearby, while others openly clustered in small groups. Whispering behind raised hands, the crowd parted as Silas's wagon approached, its wheels clattering. Against the packed dirt, 2 hired guns flanked the wagon, rifles across their laps. Evangeline sat rigid beside her father, her hands folded in her lap, her face pale but composed. Her plain brown dress was wrinkled from days of captivity, but she had managed to pin her hair neatly. Time to end this foolishness, Silas muttered, yanking her arm as they descended. You'll learn your place today. Inside the courthouse, morning light streamed through tall windows, catching dust motes and golden beams. The gallery benches creaked as people filed in, jostling for the best views. Clara slipped into a front row, her face tight with worry. Behind her sat several ranch wives who had tasted Evangeline's cooking at church suppers, and miners who remembered her mother's kindness during hard times. Boaz entered with Chaska, his injuries still visible but healing. His eyes found Evangeline's across the room, and he gave her a slight nod. She straightened her shoulders, drawing strength from his steady presence. Judge Harrison called the court to order, his gavel crack splitting the murmurs. We're here to address the matter of property rights concerning the Thorne Ranch, he announced, adjusting his spectacles. Pastor Holt, you may present your evidence. The pastor rose, Bible and deed in hand. His voice carried clear and strong as he read, this document, dated April 12th, 1871, grants Sarah Elizabeth Thorne joint ownership of all ranch holdings, including water rights and grazing lands. He held up the yellowed paper. Upon her death, these rights legally passed to her daughter Evangeline. Silas's face darkened. That paper's worthless. My wife had no head for business. She'd have given away everything we built. The signatures and witness marks are valid. Judge Harrison interrupted. Mr. Chaska, you have testimony regarding current dealings? Chaska stood, his bearing dignified. 2 weeks past, I saw railroad men leaving Thorne Ranch. They spoke of contracts, of damming the creek that feeds our hunting grounds. His dark eyes met Silas's. They said Thorne promised quick signing once family matters were settled. Lies? Silas surged to his feet. You got no right meddling in white men's business, Indian. Order! The judge's gavel cracked again. Well, have respect in this court, Mr. Thorne, or you'll be held in contempt. He turned to Evangeline. Miss Thorne, do you wish to speak? The gallery hushed. Evangeline rose slowly, her hands trembling slightly, but her voice clear. My mother loved that ranch. She taught me every creek, every grazing meadow. She swallowed hard. She also taught me that lamb's a gift from God, meant to serve more than one man's greed. Silas sneered. You're nothing but a burden. Too big, too soft, too stupid to... No. Evangeline's voice cut through his words like a knife. I've carried your cruel words like stones all my life, Father. But they're not truth. Her chin lifted. I know cattle. I know accounts. I kept ranch books while you drank away profits. I fed hands while you courted railroad men. Murmurs rippled through the gallery. Several ranchers' wives nodded, remembering times Evangeline had managed alone, while Silas disappeared to town. Mother believed I was worthy. Evangeline continued, tears gathering but not falling. She deeded me half that ranch because she knew I'd honor her dream. Land that feeds many, not just one man's pocket. The courtroom fell silent. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath outside the windows. Judge Harrison studied Evangeline's face, seeing not the awkward girl, Silas described, but a woman standing firm in her truth. Silas's face had gone purple with rage. You ungrateful. He lunged forward, but the bailiff stepped between them. I ain't ungrateful, Father, Evangeline said quietly. I'm grateful for every hard lesson that taught me my own strength. Grateful God sent folks like Boaz and Clara to help me see it. She turned to the judge. I claim my rightful half, sir. Not for spite, but for justice. The gallery broke into scattered whispers. Pastor Holt dabbed his eyes with a handkerchief. Clara beamed with pride, while Boaz's scarred face showed quiet triumph. Even some of Silas's longtime friends looked away from him, shame crossing their features as they recognized the truth in Evangeline's words. Silas's face contorted with a rage beyond reason. His weathered hand shot up, fingers curled into a striking claw. You worthless. The words choked off as he lunged at Evangeline, spittle flying from his lips. But Boaz was there, his massive frame filling the space between father and daughter. Though his shoulders still bore the bruises of Silas's hired guns, he stood firm as mountain stone. Pain flickered across his scarred features as the sudden movement pulled at healing wounds, but his voice rang steady and clear, the stunned. Courtroom, her worth isn't yours to measure. The quiet words carried weight, each one falling like summer rain on parched earth. She is not punishment, she is promise. Sunlight streamed through the high windows, catching dust motes that danced in absolute silence that followed. The gathered townsfolk held their breath. Clara pressed her handkerchief to her lips, tears spilling down her cheeks. Even Chaska, normally so, leaned forward in his seat. The words echoed off the wooden walls, filling every corner of the hushed chamber. They were simple words, plain as the boards beneath their feet, but they carried truth that could not be denied. In them lived the memory of Sarah Thorne's gentle wisdom, the strength of mother's love passed to daughter, the dignity that no man's cruelty could erase. Judge Harrison's face softened for a moment before he recovered his stern bearing. The gavel cracked like lightning. Order, Mr. Thorne. You will step back immediately. His voice grew heavy with authority. Having heard all testimony and witnessed this deplorable display, I rule that Evangeline Thorne holds full legal claim to half interest in all Thorne Ranch holdings, as her mother intended. Silas seemed to shrink, the fury draining from him like water from a broken pot. His shoulders slumped as the truth finally struck home. He had been defeated not by force, but by simple justice. His mouth worked soundlessly as he staggered back, finding no words to match this moment. Evangeline's tears fell freely now, years of pain and fear washing away with them. Boaz's large, gentle hand steadied her trembling fingers. Through blurred vision, she saw Clara beaming, Pastor Holt nodding in satisfaction, and Chaska's quiet smile of approval. "Take heart," Boaz murmured, just for her ears. "You stand on your own ground now." The courthouse steps buzzed with whispers as people filed out into the afternoon sun. Evangeline stepped into the light, her heart still hammering from the mornings. Testimony. Townsfolk who had gathered to witness the scandal now paused. Their expressions changed from curiosity to something new. Respect that old Jim Baker, who'd once laughed at her attempts to mount a horse, touched the brim of his hat. "Miss Thorne," he said, his voice gruff but sincere. "Mrs. Peterson," the general store owner's wife, pressed a handkerchief to her eyes and nodded firmly. Through the crowd, Evangeline spotted her father's broad back as he stormed toward his horse, cursing under his breath. Sheriff Matthews stepped from the shadow of the hitching post, his badge catching the sunlight. "Mind you keep the peace now, Silas," the sheriff called, his hand resting casually on his gun belt. Court's done spoke its piece. The afternoon faded into evening, casting long shadows across Clara's schoolhouse floor, where they had gathered. Evangeline sat at one of the small desks, her hands folded in her lap. Around her, those who had stood by her through it all, Boaz leaning against the wall, his injuries still evident in the way he favored his right side, Clara perched on her teaching stool. Chaska cross-legged on the floor, quiet and watchful. "I've been thinking," Evangeline said, her voice steady, "about the northern pasture where the creek bends. It's good grazing land, enough for a small herd." She looked at each face in turn. "I mean, do you grant it to my father? After everything he's done?" Clara's eyes widened. Pastor Holt, who had joined them after speaking with the judge, nodded slowly. "The Lord's mercy often confounds human wisdom," he said, Evangeline's fingers twisted in her skirt. "I won't cast him into ruin. He's still my father, though he..." Her voice caught, but she pressed on. "Though he couldn't love me as I am." Boaz pushed away from the wall, crossing the room with his uneven gait to stand before her. His scarred face held an expression of wonder, and when he spoke, his deep voice was barely above a whisper. "You've shown greater strength than any man I've known." His large hand reached out, hesitated, then gently covered hers where they lay clasped in her lap. "Mercy's a harder road than vengeance." Through the schoolhouse windows, Evangeline could see neighbors, still lingering in the street, their usual evening routines forgotten in the wake of the day's events. They gestured toward the schoolhouse, their faces showing amazement at how the scorned daughter had risen to claim not just her rights, but her dignity. The little church glowed like a jewel in the dusk, its windows warm with lamplight. Inside, Clara Winthrop moved between the wooden pews, tucking sprigs of purple wildflowers and white prairie roses into mason jars. The flowers filled the sanctuary with the sweet scent of early summer. Chaska stood near the altar, his dark eyes bright. With pride as he adjusted his best leather vest, he had spent the morning helping Boaz prepare, braiding sacred herbs into a small blessing bundle for the couple's new life together in the back room. Evangeline's fingers trembled as she draped her mother's lace shawl over her shoulders. The delicate fabric, carefully preserved all these years, carried the faintest scent of lavender. Clara had helped her sew a new dress, simple but elegant, that made her feel beautiful instead of large. The church filled quickly with townspeople, their boots creaking on the wooden floors. Even those who had once whispered cruel words now sat quietly, touched by the transformation they'd witnessed in recent months. Pastor Holt stood at the altar, his Bible open in weathered hands. Boaz waited there too, his massive frame somehow softer in his new black coat, his scars less noticeable in the gentle light. His eyes never left the back door. When the piano began to play, Evangeline stepped into the aisle. Tears welled in her eyes as she walked forward, not from shame this time, but from joy. The congregation stood, their faces showing wonder at her radiance. Pastor Holt's voice filled the church with words of perfect love, casting out fear, of two becoming one. Boaz's hands, capable of bending iron and breaking horses, held Evangeline's, with infinite tenderness as they spoke their vows. His deep voice carried clearly through the church, Claiming her as beloved God when they kissed, the congregation erupted in cheers and handkerchief waving. Even old Jim Baker wiped his eyes with his sleeve. Later, in their cabin warmed by candlelight and filled with the aroma of wedding supper, Boaz drew Evangeline close. "You were never too much for me," he whispered, his breath warm against her hair. "You were always enough?" Evangeline rested her head on his broad shoulder, feeling the steady beat of his heart. After years of feeling oversized and unwanted, she had found her perfect fit. She was finally truly home. If today's story reminded you of the quiet strength of love, I'd love to see you again. Subscribe, and tomorrow we'll meet right here, where love speaks softly and stays.